Okay, kiddos, now we are talking about our first lesson in geometry. It's going to be 1.1. We're going to talk about points, lines, and planes. So these are the basic geometry definitions that we are going to use going forward when we're describing some of these shapes in geometry. All right, so let's go to our first one. Okay, so make sure you're copying down everything I do, please, for our basic notes for our practice today. So this is called a point. Okay, so a point is just a location. Okay, so when I'm marking a spot. Okay, it's named by a capital letter. So that's how we name it. Okay, so this letter is A. So we're going to name this one point A. Okay, so we make sure that we use a capital letter. Now the thing about this point is it has no shape or size. Okay, so it's a weird concept to think of, but it's not actually there. It has no shape or size. It's just marking a location. Okay, so that first one is called a point. Okay, all right, let's go. Let's keep moving on to our next. Let's see here. Just gonna move on to our next item, which is one that looks like this. Okay, so this is looks like a line, and this is the main thing is it has an arrow on one end and a arrow on the other end. So yes, this is called a line. So it's made up of points. Okay, so if you imagine all along here are points, right? So if I get them close enough to each other, they all make a line. Okay, so the way we name it, okay, so this is crucial. It's named by a lowercase letter or 2 points on the line. Okay, so here's how we're going to name it. We're going to name it. So this one, we said it's a lowercase letter, so we could name this one. If you see this has a lowercase t, so we could call this one line T. Or, okay, we said by 2 points on the line. So this has a point A, right, and a point B. Okay, so we can say line AB, or we can say line BA. Okay, so we can actually go either direction because it's going either direction, right? Okay, so hopefully we see that. Okay, so that's how we show it. Now, the symbol that we're going to use, so let's talk about the symbol. So the symbol that we're going to use, let me not do that, sorry. Here's the symbol we're going to use. We're going to say AB, and we're going to put on top of it a symbol with an arrow going both ways. Okay, so that's what the symbol is for this line right over here, line AB. Now, we can also just call it by its name. So line T, line AB, or line BA. Okay, so it has no thickness or width. So I know you see it over here, but we have to imagine that it's just in our imagination that we're just kind of seeing in our head. Okay, and it's using collinear points. This is another word, collinear. Co, right, means with. So those are points that are on the same line. So all these, so point A and point B are quote collinear. So we can say this one, point A and point B are collinear points. Okay, so we talked about points, and those are A and B. When we have A and B on a line where it goes either way, we call that actually a line. So this would be line AB or line BA. This is the symbol that we would use for this. Okay, so let's keep it moving. Next one is a plane. Okay, so a plane is something that looks like this, right? It's just a flat surface. Now you can imagine in space it extends indefinitely in all directions. So we can imagine it keeps going all directions just like that. Okay. Uh, it's named by three non-collinear, right? So collinear we said was on the same line. So non-collinear means not on the same line. Okay, so it's named by three non-collinear points on the plane or by a lowercase letter. Okay, so let's talk about how we would name that then. So we said by three non-collinear points. So these three are not on a straight line, right? That goes that way, but then I have to go this way. So I could call this plane A, B, C. Or we said we can by a lowercase letter. So that's supposed to be a lowercase m. So we can say plane, plane M. All right, so that's a plane. It's a flat surface. Okay. Then we talked about how what a line looks like. So a line has the arrows on both ends, extends, and then a point is something that looks just like that. Okay, like point A right over here. Okay, so let's keep it moving. Now we said this is a line, right? So if that's a line, this is a line segment. Okay, so the segment is a part of a line. So it's just what connects 2 points. So we can say from A to B. Okay, so it has a definite what we call end points. Okay, that's the main thing about a segment, right? Because it has definite end points right there. It's no arrows, right? So these right here are called the end points. So we name it by those end points. Okay, so we would name this one just like you might think, segment AB. Or we can say segment BA. Right? We can go either direction, AB or BA. Okay, and then the symbol we said for the line, we use this one where it has an arrow on both sides. So this is symbol similar. We would use a we'd say AB and we'd use a straight line right on top of it, or we would say BA and just a straight line. Okay, so as you see right on here, the main difference between this and this has the arrows, right? Because this has arrows on both ends. This one does not have the arrows because this one does not have the arrows on both ends. Okay, so that's the difference. Now, when we're going to talk about later, is you might think a part plus part of something plus a part of something equals the whole thing. So we're going to use that when we're talking about our next lesson about segments. And so that's the basics on that. So we call this one segment AB or segment BA, and we use those symbols. Okay. Next, this is called a ray. Okay. So a ray is a line with an end point. Okay. So we see this end point right here. And then it extends indefinitely in the other direction. So if you see right over here, this arrow tells us that it keeps going, right? Starts there and it keeps going. Okay, so the way we name it is we name by the direction which it extends. Okay, and it's named with the end point first. Okay, so we're going to put the end point first and then another point that's on the ray. Okay, so we would name this one then ray. Okay, now remember we said the first thing is the endpoint, so the endpoint would be A, and then another letter, so B, ray AB. Okay, so that's what we would call it, not ray BA. It has to be ray AB. Now, when we name it, when we use the symbol, even say if it was like this, okay, and that was B and that was A. We said that we start with the endpoint, right? So this would be called ray AB also. Okay, so we start with the endpoint. Okay, now in the symbol, we would say AB and then we point it to the right. So that is our symbol that we would use. Okay, so here's what we need to remember is that it always points to the right when naming it. Okay, so when we name it, so when we give it a name, we're always going to point to the right. Okay, so that's one thing that'll come up in our practice. All right, so now let's go to our last term that's on here, which are opposite rays. Okay, so opposite rays are two rays that have that share a common endpoint and extend in opposite directions. So if, say for instance, this start right here, this would go right here, right? So I can put that, this would go that way, right? And then if I put a different color, if I start that way and go that way, I have two rays. So I could say ray BA, and remember, we would say BA and extend to the right, even though it's pointing to the left, right? We said it always points to the right when we name it. And then we would say this is ray BC. Right? And then we would also just do BC and point it to the right. All right, so those are our main things that we need to remember. We got a point, and we're going to name it by its letter, capital letter. We have collinear points, which means they are on the same line. Okay, so if this line has an arrow on both ends, we're going to call it AB or BA. This is a plane, and we're going to call it by three letters that are non-collinear, so that means not on the same line. This is a segment. Segment is named by the endpoint, so this would be called segment AB or segment BA. A ray is a little bit different. This one has an endpoint and an arrow. This one just has endpoint, endpoint. This one has arrow, arrow. So this one has a endpoint where it starts, and then it goes that way. So we would call this ray AB. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next page for our practice. All right, so this is what you're going to see in your Delta Math, what you're going to do next. All right, so let's take a look at this one. Pause the video for a moment. See if you can get this one on your own. Look on the other side. All right, so hopefully paused. What would we call this one? We would call this one a line. Okay, and remember on a line, and we call it a line because it has an arrow on both ends, right? That's how we know that it's a line. Okay, so the symbol that we're going to use, we said, was with an arrow on both ends, right? And then it wants to be named, so it says name it. Remember, we said it has any two letters, so I can say SL. So we can say SL, and remember, we're going to use the arrow on both sides. Or I can call it LS. LS, right? And remember, we're going to use the arrow on both sides. So that's how we call it. All right, next, what's the difference on this one and this one? This one has arrows on both sides. This one has endpoints, right? So this one we're going to call a segment. Okay, this one's a segment. Remember, the symbol is something just like that, right? Where it has definite endpoints. That's the difference between this one and this one, right? This one does not have arrows. This one has arrows, so we add arrows here. So we're going to call this by its endpoint. So JD, right? Or what's the other way? We would say DJ. All right, good. Pause the video, see if you can get this one on your own. All right, so this one we said, we noticed it has that, an endpoint on one end and a arrow on the other, so we're going to call that one a ray. Good. And the symbol we said always points to the right. So always points to the right. Okay, so as we notice, this is going this way, right? But we said it always points to the right. So when we call this one, we're going to do it just like that. And we said we start with the endpoint, so we're going to call this one YZ. Or we can also call it what else? That's right, YL. Because we said any other point, but we have to start with that Y. That's right, YL. All right, so that's it. Okay, so now our last one. Ooh, I got the wrong. This is backwards, but this is saying what will we call this one? So we can tell by this, at least, that it's called a plane, right? That's a plane. And we say we're going to call it by three letters. So we're going to call this one plane. And if we look at it, it's right over here, right? So go and take your highlighter and highlight it just like that so you can see what we're talking about, right? We're talking about something that cuts right through there, right through the middle. So 3 points would be T, TXV. So plane TXV is what we call them. All right, kiddos, we're almost done. All right, so let's look at this last part. So these are things that you may see on our upcoming DCP. So it says the intersection of two different lines is a what? These two lines are crossing. Where they intersect is right there. We call that a point. That's right. And this would be called point A. All right, now what about this? This says the intersection of two different planes is a what? So if we see this plane right over here, right? And then we see this plane right over here. Where they intersect is this right here, right? What do we call that? We're going to call that a line, right? And we would call that line Q, right? Because we see that right there. It says Q. So we would call that line Q. All right, so when two lines cross, they cross at a point. When two planes cross, they cross at a line. All right, so now let's put it all together. What if I told you, looking at this picture right over here, I want you to tell me which one of these items are each of the geometry definitions we talked about. All right, so what would we think about the sky? The sky would be like a plane, right? What about the headlight? If you see the headlight, what would we call that? It starts there, right, and then extends that way, so we would call that a ray, right? Let's actually use that, right? We would call that one a ray. All right, what about the tree trunk? So the ray would start right there, right, and go like that. The tree trunk would be like right there, end point, and right there, right? So we'd call that a segment, right? And then the stars, right? The stars would be called points. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so let's look at this then. What about on this picture? What if I told you which one, what part, if I said a line, right? We could talk about, say, from like right here to right there, if it extended along the line. So a line would be like the edge, right? Parallel. What would be parallel? Parallel would be like opposite sides of the table, right? Okay, the plane, a plane on this one would be like this top, right? That would be like a plane, and then we would call that like the tabletop, right? And then the actual point would be like a corner, right? We could say that would be like a corner. All right, so what I want you to do now is go ahead and do that delta math practice that looks basically just like this. Okay, so we want to remember what we talked about on a line where it has arrows on both sides. A segment has endpoints. A ray has a definite endpoint, and then a arrow, and then a plane looks like that. So let's make it happen. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Let me help you with this, or ask a neighbor.